Well, thank you everybody for being here today. I'm State Senator Carla Bigham, and I represent Senate District 54, which includes the northern part of Dakota County, which is South St. Paul, all the way down through Washington County, including Cottage Grove, to Hastings, Ninninger. So a big chunk of Dakota and Washington County. First, I want to thank my co-authors of Senate File 3836, Senator Ingebrigtsen, Senator Howe, Senator Franzen, and Senator Latz. This is a bipartisan piece of legislation. Senate File 3836 enhances privacy protections for conversations in peer support groups and critical incident stress management groups. This deals with our public safety personnel, and as a daughter and sister of firefighters, you know, they see things they can't unsee. And the group behind me, which consists of Sheriff of Dakota County, Tim Leslie, we have Washington County personnel, we have Cottage Grove Police Department here, we have the Attorney General, Commissioner of Public Safety. This is a big topic for us to protect our heroes, make sure that they get the help that they need. We've had a spike in suicides of our public safety personnel, and we're working together to make sure that that stops. And so I also want to thank Representative Hewitt and Long for being here today. You're going to hear from them, and Mayor of South St. Paul, Jimmy Francis. So first I want to introduce somebody that I've known. A lot of you know that I was a former Cottage Grove City Council member, and one of the first things I did was work with a bunch of people to reconstitute our canine unit. And so Officer Vandervoort and I go way back because he was the canine officer assigned when we re-brought that up. So with that, Officer Mike Vandervoort.
Thank you. My name is Mike Vandervoort. I've been in law enforcement for 23 years as serving public service as a police officer and a paramedic. Currently a detective with the Cottage Grove Police Department. I'm also currently the president of the Metro CISM team, which stands for Critical Incident Stress Management. And we provide services to 10 county metro area for agencies, police, fire, ambulance, for those involved in critical incidents. First of all, I want to thank Senator Carla Bigham and her staff and all those who support our efforts to protect those who are protecting others. I want to thank Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison and Commissioner John Harrington for allowing the Metro CISM team to speak about the importance of recognizing the number of law enforcement members facing job-related stress from the on-the-job experiences during their recent working group for police-involved use of force encounters. So, thank you. The Metro CISM team, along with CISM teams across Minnesota, consist of police officers, paramedics, firefighters, 911 dispatchers, chaplains, nurses, and mental health professionals who volunteer their time to support their peers. The motto of our team, the Metro CISM team, is serving those who serve others. Our team recognizes the importance of the stress debriefing process following critical incident and believes strongly that this bill will ultimately increase participation with Minnesota first responders involved in traumatic events. It's no secret that our public safety personnel respond to stressful events daily. These events can leave our responders with significant scars over the course of their careers. By providing an atmosphere where responders can come together and discuss how a critical incident has affected them in an environment where talking about their physical and emotional reactions are protected is vital. Over the past 2 years, almost 3 times more law enforcement officers have died by suicide, roughly 230 nationally, than were killed in the line of duty. Several of those have occurred in Minnesota in recent months. We need to recognize the impact a critical incident has on our first responders and emergency personnel, and acknowledge that these events can have long-term implications and impact the longevity of our first responders. We also know that responders take this home with them, which can create more stress for families of the responders who serve us. We want public safety to not only be physically fit, but mentally sound when responding to emergencies across our state. We are slowly changing the culture within public safety. We are learning from our mistakes of the past and trying to remove the stigma that seeking support is acceptable. Allowing our responders the ability to offload stress-related reactions in a peer support setting. is key. Our role is educating and normalizing these reactions to an abnormal situation. A private, protected environment would help to increase participation amongst our first responders. I encourage our first responders and hospital staff to seek support following a critical incident, and I would challenge administrators to support their staff during these difficult times. I want to close with a paragraph that one of our members, Rich Flayton, is he up here? There he is, wrote when we were discussing this as a team and what this means to first responders and the job that our volunteer groups, not only in the metro, but the several teams across Minnesota that serve people at all corners. For over 30 years, first responders and mental health professionals have recognized the number of stressful situations and critical incidents that they get involved in on a routine basis. They put their physical and mental health aside in order to serve community members in the best way. This dedication puts their physical and mental health in jeopardy every single time they answer a call for service. Public safety has developed over the last 3 decades the critical incident stress management model or system to let responders help one another. CISM allows police officers, firefighters, paramedics, dispatchers, nurses, doctors, and mental health professionals to come together and discuss traumatic critical events that could have devastating long-term injuries to those responders. It is vital for first responders' health and welfare that they be able to discuss these delicate situations in a privileged and confidential atmosphere in order to encourage participation. This way, first responders can open up to what may truly be affecting them. First responders come from the communities that they serve and can be affected just as much as the general population, if not more. But they need to put the stress aside momentarily to resolve the emergencies they respond to. In order to protect the responders as well as the community as a whole, first responders need to have a mechanism to talk about their thoughts in a truly confidential atmosphere. This bill will allow first responders to safely talk about stressors openly in order to return to work healthy and with a renewed dedication to those who serve. I just want to thank everyone who has supported our mission. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney General?
Well, Senator and Detective, thank you for being here. Together, Commissioner Harrington and I led a working group involving police-involved deadly force encounters. We talked about a broad range of subjects, but one of the recommendations we came up with is recommendation 4.7, and I'll read it to you. The legislature should pass a carefully crafted privacy protected conversations for peer support programs for first responders, modeled after other state model policies that protect therapeutic debriefings and individual counseling sessions led by certified peer counselors. Now, Senator Bigham did not come up with this because of our recommendation. She did it based on her experience. But it happened that we are thinking along parallel lines. And this is because we listened to a broad array of people involved in law enforcement and in the community. And what we heard is something like this. Imagine getting a call in the morning where you arrive on the scene and there's a dead baby. You leave there, and then you see a senior who's been beat up or abused. You leave there, and you meet a woman who's been raped. You leave there, and then you see some young teenager who's just gotten shot. And then you do that day, call after call, hour after hour, day after day, week after week, and then somebody expects this not to affect you. Right. Police officers are well-trained professionals, and they're also human beings. They're not robots. They need to be able to have a conversation that is meaningful and important to be able to be that top quality professional that we expect them to be, and we expect a lot of them. And we should. Anyone who carries around a gun and can take life from somebody under the proper legal circumstances should be held to a high standard, but it's not fair to say, don't be a person. Don't let any of that stuff you've just seen that the rest of us don't have to actually go see every day. So this is a proper recommendation. This is excellent legislation. I support it 100%. I'm proud of you, as I am so often. There you go again, doing good stuff.
Thank you.
And I just want to say that it is with that we throw our full shoulder behind your legislation. We're there to testify for it, write letters in favor of it, and certainly hope the legislature takes it up. Officer wellness is a critical issue. They deserve the support of our community, of our law enforcement community, of our entire community. This is going to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner?
Attorney General Ellison, Senator Bingham, really have crafted, I think, the two parallel tracks that speak to why wellness is an important component here. I remember sitting in the working group committee and hearing that first responders attempt suicide at a rate 6 to 10 times higher than the general population. And that means that if there are 13 people out of every 100,000 that are thinking about suicide or attempting suicide, there's 17 first responders. I want you to think about that number, because I think about that number in terms of having been a St. Paul cop for 33 years and having had officers commit suicide on my watch. I think about that as the past chief of the Metro Transit. Just before I arrived there, one of our sergeants had committed suicide, and it rocked the department. It rocks the foundations of certainty that the officers go out into the world knowing that they've seen too much, but they're terrified of the fact that if they tell anybody about that, their career may be over with. They may lose their family, they may lose their employment, they may lose everything because they don't feel like they can tell anybody. This bill begins the process of creating an avenue where first responders can tell somebody. The Attorney General laid it out very, very effectively. One of the things that I remember, and it struck me at the time, that it was an interesting meeting of the minds, because we had different constituent groups that came to the working group. That's right. But one of the points that they actually did to agree about was the need for healthy cops. The moms who had lost loved ones to police-involved deadly force encounters said, we need to make sure that the cops that are out there on the streets protecting us now and protecting our children are healthy. And the chiefs and the sheriffs who command those officers said, I need to make sure that the officers that I'm sending out to do really tough work are healthy. When you get those two groups agreeing, I think you've got something there. And I think this bill speaks to that. One final point before I close, because one of the parts of being in the Department of Public Safety is that we also work with all of the firemen in the state of Minnesota, the state fire marshal's office and all the state fire training there. I was meeting with fire chiefs from small towns and from big cities yesterday, talking to them about what their needs are. And they talked about there are 3 things that are killing firefighters: cancer, fires themselves, and suicide. One of the things I'm really appreciative in this bill is that this really speaks to all first responders, because firefighters, like cops, can't unsee the worst days of their life. And especially as we get outside of the metro area, St. Paul has EAP, Minneapolis had EAP, but when you get into the 1- and 2-man departments, 1- and 2 officer departments, when you get into the small volunteer fire departments, the only person to tell is going to be a peer. This will guarantee and ensure that those conversations are protected and that those people, when they have seen too much, have somebody they can reach out to help them get the help that they need. We are all in this together, Greater Minnesota and Twin Cities, police and fire and the community. This will bring us healthier first responders, and I appreciate and absolutely support this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor?
Thank you. Mayor Jimmy Francis, South St. Paul. I'm proud to be here and represent our city and support this effort. So thank you, senators, for bringing this forward. As Commissioner Harrington said, it rocked a department with a suicide in their department. It rocked our town. We have a department of 35, and officer suicide rocked not only that department, but our entire city. And as somebody who me personally looks at it as a family business. My grandfather was a sheriff's deputy. My uncles were all firefighters. My brother is a captain in Apple Valley. It's a family business. And as I stood there at the funeral of our Sergeant Slifko, you want to do something. As a policymaker, it's hard to do. It's, you know, you can stand there and support and make sure everybody's taken care of at that time, but this is something that I can stand behind and get behind to help. And so I am very appreciative on behalf of our department and our city and our fire department and our first responders in our city that this is being looked at, because it is very important. And one thing that I'm trying to do in our city is also extend that to the spouses that help, so that sometimes the pillow talk is the only talk that that officer has, and that's with a spouse. And while they didn't see some of that stuff, you know, it really affects that family. So we're continuing to work on this as a city and as a department. And so I thank you for allowing me to be here and support you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. And then, because we know that a bill has to pass both chambers, we have Representative Hewitt here.
Yeah. The House will bring this up last, but we'll also bring it home. I am Representative Hewitt, and I've spent the last 30-some years of my life both in emergency medicine and the ER in our hospital right here in St. Paul. That's how I know many of these men and ladies and gentlemen in this here. And I've also been in EMS both in the city of Maplewood and for LifeLink 3 for a number of those years. What really brings this bill home, and I was real happy when Senator Bingham came to me about this bill, was many of you know already that I spent this last summer visiting communities throughout Minnesota with our shortage of EMS, trying to figure out what the root cause of our lack of recruitment and retention and volunteerism across the state is. And the meetings were interesting, but what was more interesting is I went and talked to the individuals that have left, that are now living with what they lived with when they were in EMS, and they said, I couldn't take it anymore. Not only the volunteerism and the time of doing it, but I basically I'm done. Some of our ambulance services in outstate right now are working with 2 individuals on their service. I'm concerned. This legislation really hits home with me. Over the 30 years, naturally, I've been involved with many of these sessions. And I've had many employees come to me, I'm not going to it because I just don't feel safe. I need my job. And we can't have that happen anymore. This legislation will take care of that. I want to leave you with one thing that I think is so important. We have, this I got to tell you who's also worked on this, our good friends at NAMI. Is Sue around?
Yep.
There she is there. Sue's been a real great asset to us, and her voice is really, really great. But we have dispatchers. We have definitely correction officers and conservation officers and EMS and police officers and firefighters, which you heard about. So we have a big gamut. No one really knows when you dial 911 what goes into effect in getting that machine there, and it's amazing. I didn't realize it till I was part of it. All of a sudden, you would get, probably in many cases, as many of us here today, just because you're having trouble breathing or somebody might hurt you. But the quote from a movie that I really love, and Demi Moore's quote was, "You sleep better at night because there's men and women standing on a wall saying, no one's going to hurt you tonight." And that's who these people are. So this bill will help them stay there. Thank you.
Question?
So is the big problem that people are disclosing this private information, or is it that people are not coming forward and talking about this stuff at all because of their fear of potential disclosure, or both, or what?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, I'm married to one, but I think it's a little bit of both. You know, they are being advised to not speak about this for fear that whether it's civil or criminal can be possibly used against them. And so not being able to come forward for fear of your job is a big deterrent when you're possibly looking at losing, you know, your income and ability to provide for your family. So I don't know if
Well, John and I heard people say things directly to this effect. I mean, actually, Carla's quite right about what she said, but we actually heard people say, I wouldn't come by, and we've even heard defense counsel say, I would never allow my client to participate in one of those sessions. And so this is one way to address it.
And I've talked to cops who said the first time somebody came out and said, I'm really suffering from depression right now and I'm really struggling, and they got put on admin leave, which meant it was unpaid admin leave. That was the last time anybody came forward to talk about depression in that department. Yeah. It had a complete, not just a chilling effect, it froze everybody else in that department out from the idea that they could ever disclose. And if you can't disclose, it's really hard to start asking for help or to seek help or get support when you can't even talk about what's going on.
Can you describe what peer support means? Are there licensed psychologists or therapists, or is it really a group of peers? Like if someone did something that they're not, I know these things happen in the heat of the moment, and if somebody didn't act quickly enough and they're feeling guilty, I mean, what's talked about and who's talking?
Our peer supports are basically an environment where members of a critical incident, whether it be an officer-involved incident or a bad accident or a fatal house fire, where people can come together and talk about their reactions to that. We see that obviously responders with children are more affected when they respond to situations involving children versus responders that don't have children. Our job as peer support isn't to necessarily get the details of what maybe went right or what went wrong. Our job is to address the reactions to an abnormal situation. Okay? There's a time and a place in an arena to address how things went as far as policies or how the situation handled. But as far as dealing with the reactions to an event, that's our job. We don't try to dive into the necessarily facts of the case. We dive into the reactions of the case and the people involved and how they can move forward and become and stay productive members of their agency. That answer your question?
Perhaps a question for one of the law enforcement officers out there. What would it mean for you or for someone you work with to have this option to know that if they do come forward, that will be protected information unless the officer says you can use that? Don't know, I'll jump at once.
Yeah, so just as an editorial, I'm Tim Leslie, the sheriff in Dakota County. 31 years ago, John Harrington and I went to a scene where there were multiple deaths, and I can remember it like it was yesterday, unfortunately. So I was his rookie, so I'm just a tad younger than him. It would be so helpful. I left the Hastings and the Dakota County Sheriff's Office talking to the peer support team that were meeting for the first time. And I told them what Senator Bingham and Representative Hewitt have done. And they were so rejoiceful that knowing that people who come forward now will have the ability to speak to an issue that's bothering them and know that it's going to be held in confidence. I mean, how refreshing and freeing a feeling is that when you know that you can have a conversation with somebody who's got a burr under their saddle, they're expressing depression or having an inability to sleep or recover from it, knowing that they can have this conversation and know that it's private.
Did you want to? Okay.
Senator, can I just say, I'm so glad you shared that traumatic moment in your life. Because we are up here speaking in euphemisms a bit. There are horrific things that officers have to say. And so I think it is important to understand that no person of normal sensibility can see these things and then see them day after day after day and walk away unscathed. So this is a critical thing. And I don't know, maybe Nami has something to say about this,
Well, I can say that, so many officers and EMTs and others actually respond to people who are having a mental health crisis. I want to make sure that the people who respond are not having their own crisis. And so it's really important that we look at their mental health. If you're agitated, if you haven't slept, your response is not going to be, frankly, as patient and, as kind of low-key as it should be. And the other thing I want to say is, it's not really about the stigma of mental illness, it's the fear of discrimination. And so people are afraid to seek out help because they're afraid that they're going to lose their jobs, they won't get a promotion, things like that. So it really is fear of discrimination.
culture shift that is starting to happen but needs to progress too. Can one of you speak about conversations going on in law enforcement and how that might be changing?
Hi, I'm Deputy Dave Chris with Washington County. The culture shift is what motivates me for this. In the past, and I'm relatively new deputy, I've been doing this for about 8 years, but in the past, if you were to experience a traumatic event, it was rub some dirt on it, get back after it. With this legislation, it says it's okay to not be okay, but let's talk about why. And we're just trying to change the whole culture. So, thanks.
Is this an area where there isn't any current law that kind of offers any protection, or do any kind of employment contracts cover this kind of?
That's way over my pay grade. I don't believe there is current legislation that would cover this, but as far as contracts and stuff with employees, I wouldn't know.
This really kind of defines roles, and there's really kind of two roles going forward, and it's the critical incident stress management model for critical incidents, and there's also the peer support model that a lot of agencies are trying to establish within their own agencies, whether it be police, fire, EMS, and those are the day-to-day stuff. Those are kind of checking up on your coworkers and making sure things are okay so you're ready to respond when needed. And then we come in as a critical incident stress management team for those critical incidents. So we all have kind of a certain lane in the road. We're all going towards the right direction of great mental health for first responders. But we all have kind of a piece of the pie is what we're trying to accomplish. And 24 other states have legislation similar to this that defines critical incident stress management, peer support, and protecting those who serve others.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you. Thank you.